Good evening, Rowan. It's the 1st of January 2017 and it's about 5 o'clock. And obviously, this is my usual Sunday evening video to reassure you that I haven't been seducing any priests over the weekend, so you can relax. Now, I know it's a bit early to be making this video, and I could technically go out seducing priests later on, but I probably won't do that because I know how much it's infuriating you that you're not in control of me, that I'm in control of me, and that you're not dictating to me what I'm going to do or how I'm going to act. Now, obviously, you've seen the two videos that I uploaded this morning. Actually, I uploaded them last night, but I forgot to publish them. So I published those videos this morning of me in altercations with my neighbours, one of whom sexually assaulted me last night, because people have just got the right to do that, haven't they? I've got no rights over my own body to decide who I do and don't want to touch it. So that's all been taken away from me, and this is considered to be help, even though it's categorised as torture when it happens to other people. So that's what happened last night. There were actually three videos. Well, first of all, one of those videos cuts off very suddenly because the man was wrestling with me and I dropped my phone on the floor. It fell apart and the battery came out. So that's why the video cuts off suddenly. And then there was a third video which was much longer, but when I put my phone back together, I don't think I put the memory card back in properly the first time. And as a result of that, the third video didn't actually save on my phone, so that's gone forever. But anyway, there was a third one which was quite a lot longer. So so anyway, so this is how I'm going to continue to deal with my neighbours harassing me. And in fact, I was kept awake all night long being attacked by remote weapons, being sexually abused. So that's what happened. So I'm quite tired. So this is one reason why I'm making this video quite early. But then throughout the night, because I was continuously being kept awake, and because my neighbours had deliberately upset me earlier, and because I did tell them I was going to do this as well, if they ever bothered me again, that even when they were quiet and they'd gone to sleep, I just went round and hammered on their door. Quite literally hammered, because I was using a hammer this time. So there I was, hammering on their door to wake them up deliberately, because that's what people do to me. But obviously this is very nasty and spiteful and bad. It is bad when I do it. But when other people do it to me, it's helpful. So that's quite interesting, isn't it, really? So anyway, I thought we could talk this evening, begin by talking about some book reviews that you wrote in the New Statesman, which was published on the 28th of December 2016. So I'm going to come on to talking about that now. Right, so the book review that you've written, you're actually reviewing two books, one by an author called Miller and one by an author called Rhys Jones. Now, first of all, the surname Rhys Jones, it's a double-barrelled surname, and both these surnames, Rhys and Jones, are Welsh surnames. That's relevant to something I say in a minute, so I just want to make that point now. And I also get the impression that you're identifying yourself with Miller in this book review, and that you're identifying me with Rhys Jones. And I'll say some more about that in a minute. The second thing I want to say is that I'm not actually dealing with the political content of these books, which are both about migration, according to your book review. They could be about anything like basket weaving or something like that, couldn't they? Because you just make everything up anyway. So I'm not understanding that these books are necessarily about the things that you say they are anyway. So I'm just going to be referring to a couple of statements that you've made in these books. I'm going to look at the first paragraph and then a couple of other statements that you've made later in the book reviews. and and just talk about your attempts at manipulation and sniping again, which is what you do frequently. It's your modus operandi, and obviously, because you're a psychopath, you can't learn that this is never ever going to have any effect on me. So here we are, here's the first paragraph. So it's supposedly immigration or migration that these books are talking about. So this is what you say. This is a subject on which confusion, malice, and panic continue to dominate the discussion. Well, this is true actually, but I'm not talking about immigration or migration. I'm talking about the way that you conduct yourself and the things that you say. This is in fact dominated by confusion, malice, and panic. So you're confused because you've got extreme narcissistic delusions. You think that the universe revolves around you. You've got a great sense of entitlement. You quite literally think that you're God, as I've spoken about and demonstrated in previous videos. And therefore, you're confused that the universe isn't doing your bidding. And particularly certain individuals within it, like me, you're confused about that. And so this is a subject which is dominated by confusion. Every subject you talk about, in fact, because you're confused. I'm not the slightest bit confused. I know exactly who I am, what motivates me, what's going on in my life, and I'm not in the slightest bit confused. I'm a very rational person. I've got very organised thoughts. And this is because I don't spend all my time lying. This is one reason, anyway. I don't spend all my time lying, so I don't have to use a great deal of mental energy trying to remember what I said before. So I'm not in the slightest bit confused. I don't have conflict in my personality. I'm a very integrated person, and when left to my own devices, I'm absolutely fine. So you're confused, and I'm not confused. So if confusion is dominating the discussion for you, then that's because you're confused. It's got absolutely nothing to do with me. So the second thing that you said, the discussion is dominated by is malice. Well, you're a very malicious person because look at the hate campaign you've orchestrated against me for decades. And I'm going to talk a bit more about that later on and where you got the idea for this hate campaign that you're coordinating, shall we say, or you came up with the idea for this campaign against me to try and bring me down and destroy me, using torture techniques, which I spoke about in my last video. Things which are defined as torture if they happen to anybody else, but things which I'm supposed to regard as helpful, and I'm labelled as mentally ill if I'm distressed by events which are regarded as torture in the experience of other people. So you're an exceptionally malicious person. I'm not a malicious person. I would never go and instigate malice against another person. But then on the other hand, if a person is going to behave in a malicious way towards me, like deliberately disturbing me and harassing me, for example, the way that my neighbours have been doing, then I'm not going to make it easy for a person to continue behaving in a malicious way towards me. And that will sometimes involve preemptive action, but mainly it's retaliatory action, just treating them in the same way that they treat me, because I can't ask any authority to intervene, because the authorities always side with the people who are persecuting me. And in fact, on numerous occasions, people have deliberately provoked me to shout at them and tell them to fuck off. They've deliberately provoked me to do that so that they can call the police and have me arrested and dragged out of buildings and off buses and so on, and out of my house as well, so they can lock me up and take me to court. So people have deliberately provoked me to retaliate against them just by shouting and telling them to fuck off. I mean, they've deliberately done that. just so that they could have the authorities come and persecute me. So that's exceptionally malicious when you're tormenting a person just so you can get some authority to come and persecute them even further and to side with the persecutor, because they know there's not going to be any comeback on them, so they don't give a fuck. So that's exceptionally malicious. So I don't behave in a malicious way. You behave in a malicious way. This is a malicious campaign of hate you've dreamed up. Well, got the idea from somewhere, and so you're a malicious person. So this is a subject on which confusion, you're confused, malice, you're malicious, and panic continue to dominate the discussion. So thank you for letting me know once again how soon this is all going to end by your repeated use of the word panic, because you are panicking and I am not panicking. So you're talking about yourself in relation to confusion, malice and panic, and you say they continue to dominate the discussion. Well, there's no discussion with me, Rowan. I'm in charge of this narrative. You are not in charge. You're an obnoxious brat. You've got the psychological state of an infant. I'm setting the boundaries. I'm controlling the narrative. You are not in control. I'm telling you how it is. There is no discussion. There is no give or take in this. You have absolutely overstepped the mark of appropriate way to engage with another individual. I've made it clear over and over again that I want nothing to do with you and your perverted associates, and I want nothing to do with anybody who treats me in an abusive way, and there's going to be no discussion about that. Not today, not any day. So that's the way it is. So this is a subject on which confusion, malice and panic continue to dominate the discussion. You're confused, malicious and panicking, and there's going to be no discussion. So you then say, at the end of a year in which migration has featured as an important theme of two depressingly irrational political campaigns, well, your rhetoric is depressingly irrational because, as I've said, you present no facts and evidence and you just make impressionistic statements in order to try and manipulate the minds of people into going along with your agenda, and emotional blackmail you use as well, and virtue signalling as if you care about migrants, foreigners, poor people, women, gay people, people in the third world, people anywhere. You don't care about anybody except yourself. You don't even care about your own children. So you talk about here now irrational political campaigns. It might feel as though populist emotion had won the day for the time being. Well, you're the person who's driven by emotion, aren't you, as I demonstrated in a video I made about the talk that you gave about sustainable prosperity on the 28th of November 2016, where you said you were still grieving. You were banging on about this for quite a long time, about grieving and how grieving you were and wounded about the referendum outcome and Donald Trump being elected president of the United States. So you're the one who wants to be driven by emotion, and not only that, you were promoting this as the ideal. Everybody should be driven by emotion, and I talked about that a lot in the video, so I won't talk about that again now. But you want everybody round in a huddle discussing how miserable it all is, and never moving on and resolving their issues and focusing on positive things. You actually promote the opposite of what is beneficial. That's what I said in the video. So for the time being, so you're saying the New World Order is going to launch a comeback. And you're clinging to that hope there. But for both of these books, in drastically different ways, in drastically different ways, alert us to questions we cannot avoid indefinitely. So I always tell you to be alert because I'm going to arrest you for terrorism, make a citizen's arrest because of all your lies about 9/11. And you talk about us not being able to avoid questions indefinitely? Well, like I've said about 1,000 times, Rowan, there's nothing indefinite about this situation, which is going to end very soon anyway. That's why you keep talking about panicking, because you're panicking. And in any case, as I've said, I'm going to drop dead one day, so it can't possibly be indefinite. And you probably dropped dead a long time before that as well, because you're a decrepit old fart. But even if you don't, I'm still going to drop dead, so there's nothing indefinite about it. So there's no point keep on saying it's indefinite, because it obviously isn't. Everything is finite. So we can't avoid indefinitely these questions if we want a reasonable and humane approach to how comparatively prosperous nations should respond to rising levels of migration, including the unprecedented numbers of people displaced by war, persecution, or extreme climate conditions. Well, I've been displaced by persecution and, metaphorically speaking, extreme climate conditions as well. So that could be me that you're talking about. But I don't want you treating me humanely, Rowan, like I'm an animal. I'm a separate human being. You're not superior to me. This is a narcissistic delusion of yours. It's a narcissistic delusion that you need to be solving the problems of the rest of the human race anyway, because you're the one with all the problems. You think other people need taken care of because no one ever took care of you, and so you think that's the nature of the world, whereas it isn't. In fact, most people, their parents take care of them to a reasonable degree, and your parents didn't, and this is why you're so obsessed with taking care of other people, because you're convinced that they need this, whereas it's in fact it's you that needs it, you that needs appropriate boundaries setting and needs to move on from this infantile state in which you're fixated. So this is just another comment, a brief comment I want to pick up on and say something about. For both authors, despite all their differences, and each illustrates with crystal clarity what the other regards as deplorably confused, immoral, or regressive. So, as I've said, you're identifying with this Miller character, I believe. I'll say a bit about that in a minute. And you're identifying me with this Rhys Jones character. So I've talked before and I've made videos before about your highly developed strategies for deflecting criticism and diverting it and avoiding it, basically. You've got these highly developed strategies to avoid any form of narcissistic injury, and I've commented on this many times and made whole videos about it. And so I said, this is what I've said in the past, the first thing you do when someone criticises you, you say you're projecting it onto me. All that's true about you, and you're just accusing me of doing this thing that you're actually doing. You're looking in the mirror, basically, and you're seeing yourself, and you're criticising me for the things you're guilty of, which is kind of ironic because this is exactly what you do. So, for example, as I've said before, you went around telling people I was crazy, I was a delinquent sex maniac and fantasist. And in fact, you're crazy and a delinquent sex maniac and fantasist. So the opposite is always true of what you say. That's a good way of finding out what's going on in the world. Just take what you say and assume it's the opposite and take it from there. And you find out all this evidence that that is in fact the case. So that's the first strategy that you use. And I've also said before that when that strategy doesn't work, when you don't silence your opponent or bring them round to your way of thinking by making this outlandish accusation, then the second strategy you employ is that you say, okay, well, I am that bad really, or I did do that bad thing, but you're just as bad as me. So that's your second strategy, and I've mentioned that in at least one video before, and possibly two. In fact, more than two, I think. So this is this second strategy that you're employing here. For both authors, despite all their differences, and each illustrates with crystal clarity what the other regards as deplorably confused, immoral, or regressive. So if you're talking about yourself, Rowan, you don't talk with crystal clarity, do you? You're constantly obfuscating, inventing new words, just talking baloney a lot of the time, impressionistic bullshit. You don't cite any facts and evidence and sources for the outlandish claims that you make, and you respond to concrete evidence and actual facts with ad hominem arguments, and that there's something disturbed or immoral about the person who's criticising you, or um, engaged in political debate that's the opposite of what you want the political outcome to be. You don't like that, so you malign your opponents. And I've said this many times before. So this is what you do. You don't explain anything with crystal clarity. And you are, in fact, deplorably confused, immoral, and regressive. Whereas I'm not deplorably confused, immoral, or regressive because I'm behaving in a moral way, I'm telling the truth, and I'm disseminating facts and evidence to demonstrate my point of view and the reason I'm arguing in the way that I am. So this. This isn't going to work, Rowan. It's just the second strategy that you employ to divert criticism. Oh, yes, well, I am like that, but you're just as bad as me. To make it look like there's some evenness in this situation, that I'm presenting some facts and you're presenting contradictory facts, which you're not presenting at all, and you're just behaving in this exceptionally immature and immoral way in order to try and manipulate and force the outcome that you want. Right, so you're not actually looking at the screenshot of the part I'm going to talk about now because it's very brief, but I have mentioned that you were identifying yourself with Miller in this article, the author Miller, and you describe in a part of the book review that you can't see at the moment that Miller exhibits fair-minded treatment of those who disagree with him, and that Miller's is an adult view of political choices. So I think because you're identifying me with this other character, this Rhys Jones character, which you can see in the screenshot, you're trying to present yourself as the adult and me as the immature person, even though the opposite is true. In fact, I'm a very mature person, very integrated personality, and I know full well who I am and what I want and what my principles are and this kind of thing, and no one is going to swerve me off that by any means whatsoever. And you're fixated in infancy, as I've demonstrated on many occasions. So you're trying to present yourself as a fair-minded person here, fair-minded treatment of people who disagree with you. Well, you don't, Rowan. You try to obliterate them, don't you? Look what you've done to me. So then, here's the screenshot that you can see where you're talking about Jones, this Rhys Jones character. Is by contrast a fierce polemicist who finds almost nothing good to say about the institutions of the state. Well, I'm a fierce polemicist who finds almost nothing good to say about the institutions of the state. And then you talk about his nomadic, implicitly anarchistic migrants. So when you're talking about nomadic people here, you're talking about gypsies, aren't you? And I'm an anarchist as well. So his nomadic, implicitly anarchistic migrants are curiously rootless and anonymous. It's as if, as in so many capitalist philosophies, people's actual hinterland, familial, cultural, religious, linguistic, were irrelevant to their strict political identity. Well, I just will say a word here on the wider political context of it, but this is a Marxist philosophy, that people are entirely determined by their circumstances, and that their language, culture, and their identity is going to be somehow changed if you just put them into other situations, other circumstances. So this is the Marxist ideology. So I'm not going to comment on capitalist philosophies, but this is how communist societies operate as well, that people are told where to work and what kind of skills to develop and all this kind of thing. So this is just complete nonsense. It's the opposite of what's true. And I would also say that I believe that when you're talking about this Rhys Jones character here, you're actually talking about the fact that I've told you that my beloved comes from North Wales, and I think you probably wrote this article just after I'd made the video where you were saying it was about the lecture that you gave, supposedly about Mary, the mother of Jesus, in the middle of November 2016, where you talked about something like success isn't about getting stocked up with something, and I said I thought you were referring to the Catholic Bishop of Leeds, Marcus Stock, here, because you really emphasised this. And I said, well, if I'm not supposed to be getting stocked up, what am I supposed to be doing then? Getting Williamsed up. And then I wondered how you knew the name of the Catholic Bishop of Leeds, since he's only been a bishop there a couple of years. And I said I thought you'd been looking on the Diocese of Leeds website. And I bet you'd also been looking through the directory of priests there, see if you could guess who my beloved was. And I then read out a list of priests from the Catholic Diocese of Leeds who either have Welsh surnames or surnames that are very common in Wales. And Rhys and Jones are both Welsh surnames, so I think there may be an allusion to that in this book review as well. Anyway, I'm not going to say any more about it. It does go on quite a bit longer, but there's a lot of political stuff in that I can't even be bothered to engage with today. But I do want to say another word about the hate campaign that you're having me subjected to at the moment in order to try and break me down and extract a false confession, get yourself off the hook, and feed your narcissistic delusions, get me to give you what you want. So I'm going to play I'm going to play one clip now of an interview with someone who's written a book on the subject. But basically, this method of psychological harassment with gang stalking, attacking with remote weapons, and playing all these spiteful mind games and harassing people with the authorities, having them arrested and framed for various things. This was a technique of psychological harassment that was developed in East Germany by the Stasi, and it was used to take down, discredit, destroy, and neutralise political dissenters. And so I'm going to play a clip of an interview about that now, and also show some slides of an article which describes this technique, and then I'm going to come back and say a couple of words about it.
Another one that's written by, I think, one of your countrymen, A.K. Forwood, who's been on both sides of the gang stalking spectrum, wrote a short book called Gang Stalking and Mind Control, The Destruction of Society Through Community Spying Networks. This gets into all the, the perpetrators who are then coordinated in a real command structure worldwide now. We're talking about a civilian command structure, people talking on cell phones and iPads and getting orders from central control to go harass this individual or do this street theater or do this gaslighting or a whole series of psychological harassment techniques that go back to the East German Stasi police in the 80s. Check out the movie The Lives of Others, which, when East Germany fell apart in 89 and the wall came down, they actually had to open up the records. And this was all pencil and paper or typewriter records. And the people of East Germany were able to go in and look at the records that the government had on every single human being. And, of course, many of those people were targeted. And the East German word is Zerzerstung or something, or the German word, which literally means decomposition. So the idea is to destroy every aspect of the target's life and to get them homeless out on the street, or to get them so frustrated and harassed and depressed that they actually kill themselves. So this is a murder weapon. It's a slow, when I talk about no-touch torture, when I talk about non-lethal weapons, this is what it is. These are the weapons in conjunction with then the street harassing, the stalking, which first isolates and then drives a targeted individual to want to kill themselves. And And we're talking a satanically inspired program. There's no doubt in my mind. The Cheka in Soviet Union did this, the Stasi, the Gestapo and Nazis, and now the American intelligence state, Department of Homeland Security, FBI, and their contractors.
Right, so you've just seen some slides and heard a clip of an interview where somebody is talking about the exact same strategy that's employed against me, which was developed to try and neutralise political dissenters in East Germany, and had quite a high level of success about that because it tended to drive people mad. Now, I want to say a couple of things about that. Um, when you had me thrown out of St Michael's Church in 2004, that was because I was consistently complaining about David Pete's sexually harassing behaviour and the fact that he'd masturbated in front of me with his hands in his pockets. And you were convinced that if you acted in this punitive way towards me, first away you took away everything that I was involved in the church, which was an awful lot of things, which I've described a lot of them on um, YouTube before, and then you later described me as someone at the margins. In fact, I was somebody in the thick of it, and you put me at the margins or at the edge, as you keep describing it. So the only reason, as I've said, that I was at the edge was because you put me there. You took me from the centre and put me at the edge, and I've never been able to be involved in church life in that way since then. Since May 2004, I've been prevented from doing it everywhere I've been. So that's what you did, and when I didn't capitulate, you panicked. So you decided to go around and tell people absolutely everywhere that it was me who made sexual advances towards David Pete rather than the other way around. It's easy to demonstrate that that's false because it's not mentioned in the letters, having me sacked from everything and thrown out of the church in 2004. I didn't know that you were doing this actually until the end of 2010. I realised that's what you'd said, and it came to light to other people in 2009 because I gave a number of letters that I'd written in complaint about David Pete and the vile abusive letters that I'd received in response to this, including sacking me from everything and throwing me out of the church without even any investigation being conducted. I gave them to a Catholic priest in August 2009, and that's when it came to light, to other people at least, that you'd been lying to everybody about the circumstances in which I'd been thrown out of that church. So it was in 2009 that this gang stalking started against me, and this harassment I was experiencing at work and in every area of my life. And I think what happened, nobody tells me what's going on, so I'm just having to guess that you were asked what would demonstrate that the things that you'd said about me were true, and you came up with this campaign of gang stalking and all the other harassment and abuse that I experienced, being terrorised by state authorities and this kind of thing. You came up with this idea. That this would neutralize me, but you always claim to be helping people because you're completely delusional and you think the world revolves around you, but you didn't get this harassment campaign from nowhere, did you? It's actually a technique that was employed by the Stasi, and of course you are a communist and you've talked about bringing in a Stalinist dictatorship in Britain through the influence of parish churches in the Church of England, and I've played that clip before as well. So you're very well aware of the political situation in Eastern Europe and what was going on during the communist era, and so this is where you came up with this campaign intended to neutralise political dissenters being unleashed on me. So that's where you got the idea from, and I've just demonstrated with these clips and slides that this is what's happening to me, and this was what was happening to political dissenters in East Germany, and I think that's where you got the idea from. Now, I did talk in my last video about things that have been happening to me being defined as torture when they happen to other people, but somehow when they happen to me, I'm expected to find them all benevolent and helpful and cuddly and all this kind of thing, and that then I'm having a label of mentally ill slapped on me if I resist this constant abuse or become distressed by it. There's something wrong with me and I'm penalised for complaining. And in fact, as I've said, people deliberately provoked me to tell people to fuck off and to shout at them to go away and stop harassing me, in order that they could call the authorities and have them come and persecute me as well. So this is what's been going on, and it's a deliberate campaign of psychological harassment which was intended to neutralise political dissenters in East Germany and also in other countries in the Eastern Bloc. It migrated there. It's also migrated to the United States and is employed by the CIA, and the term for it used over there is COINTELPRO. So this is the strategy of psychological harassment being used against me in order to neutralise me as a political opponent of you, as someone who might bring you down, and this is where you got the idea from. So I'm now going to mention two things about psychiatry and its supposed therapeutic intervention with me. Well, the first thing is I think that part of me being kidnapped and having a mental health label slapped on me at the end of July 2011, part of that was a vindictive act, I think, retribution from the social worker, the approved social worker that came to my house when the police kicked my door down, who was an exceptionally patronising and very arrogant man. I told him he was a total prick anyway, and I wouldn't go anywhere with him. That's why the police took me to the hospital. And after he'd gone out of my house, one of the policemen actually agreed with me and said he is, isn't he? After I'd just called the man a prick, the social worker. And also the two policemen who kicked my door down on this occasion and then took me to the hospital, and they were present through all of this supposed psychiatric assessment. They were present there all the time. They stayed with me, helped me secure my house and get my things together and water my plants and get someone to feed my cat. And then took me to the hospital. So they were with me for several hours on that day, and I've seen them again, both of them, since then, and I told one of them what had happened to me, that they kept me in the hospital for 7 weeks, they drugged me, and they nearly killed me, and they said that I had a mental health disorder, and one of the policemen I told this to, who'd been there on the day, said, I don't understand that. So they just completely fabricated this out of nothing. There was nothing wrong with me at all. And they said I wouldn't understand or I wouldn't know or remember what had happened on that day. And I've actually given since then, since the psychiatrist came to my house the day after that, I thought through what had happened that day, and I gave the whole itinerary of that day from first thing in the morning till last thing at the evening when I was in the hospital, and also over the weekend and in the following weeks, and the fact that I was engaged in activities like knitting and reading knitting patterns and so on that I wouldn't have been able to do as if I was in this psychotic state that they were claiming that I was in. It was just completely bogus. They just made it up. So anyway, I think that, because I don't think that was the first time I met that social worker. An approved social worker is someone who has statutory power in Britain and can be part of a team that forces someone into hospital under the Mental Health Act. And I was working in mental health prior to that, and not long before that, I'd been working for a man who was a foreigner, and he didn't speak a word of English, and I'd been visiting this man with an interpreter in his 10th floor flat, and it was about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and the man was in a very agitated state and was threatening to throw himself out of the window. And he lived on his own, and there was no one to take care of him, and he couldn't even call any help because he didn't speak English. So I thought, it's not safe to leave him here. We need to get him in hospital, really. So I phoned up the Mental Health Act assessment team, the social worker, who I believe was this man who came to my house. He was quite annoyed about me phoning him up so late in the day, which meant if he came out, he wouldn't have been able to get home from work on time. Well, of course, neither did I or the interpreter or the psychiatrist, but he didn't care about that. He just cared about himself. So when I phoned him up and explained the situation, he asked me, have you found out if there's any beds? Well, what he meant was, are there any male beds available in psychiatric hospitals in this city? Well, I was on the 10th floor of a block of flats with a man who was threatening to throw himself out of the window, who couldn't even speak English, and he was sitting in his cosy office on the telephone that he could have used to phone up and find this out. You don't even have to phone round the hospitals, you just phone the bed manager and they tell you whether there are beds available or not. So all he had to do was make one phone call. So it turned out there weren't any beds in Leeds, and I insisted that he come out. He had to get 2 psychiatrists to come out. He was complaining about this on the phone with me, that he was having to do all these things, even though it was his job and he got paid a fortune for doing it, more than me. He wasn't in the least bit concerned about this man who might throw himself out of the window. So anyway, they all came out, and he was still insisting, even though everyone else was agreeing that the man would be better off in hospital. Oh, just leave him here and that. And I said, well, look, if he was here with his family or friends to look after him, if he spoke English, maybe I'd think differently. But what's he going to do if he gets in this state again when we've all gone? He's not safe to be left here on his own. So it was decided to take him into hospital. There were no beds. He had to go to a private hospital. And this social worker was furious with me that he was having to go through all of this hassle, even though that it was his job, that he was paid a fortune for anyway. And of course, none of the rest of us got home from work on time either. I didn't, because I had to go back to the office and fax all this man's information to the hospital he was going to. The psychiatrist didn't, and the interpreter didn't either. In fact, he was there later than everybody because he had to be explaining to the ambulance crew and the man and everything. So that's how it was. So it's my view that this social worker had vindictive intentions towards me, and it's my view that it was him who was telling all the lies that I was in a psychotic state. And because he was really winding me up, whereas he was doing it on purpose, whereas the other people, the 2 psychiatrists who came and the 2 police officers, weren't treating me in this antagonistic way, which he was, and that's what I think was the reason behind it. So his vindictive action nearly killed me. and led to all these terrible physical and mental side effects that I had, which um, these drugs are used to torture people in Guantanamo Bay and in the former Soviet Union. So that's how I think I came to be having this mental health label stuck on me, because he was lying about me as an act of vindictiveness. He was absolutely jumping for joy. I'm not exaggerating. He was skipping down the path. And then even after I got to the hospital, he came right onto the ward, which he didn't really have any right to do. And I was sitting in my room that a nurse had taken me to, and I was talking to the nurse, and he came in there to antagonise me further. He was absolutely delighted with himself. He was getting a thrill out of it. It was an absolute disgrace that such a man could be in such a position with so much power over people when he can just use it in such a vindictive way, and that nearly led to my death. So anyway, so that's the first thing I want to say about that. And the second thing I want to say, I want to explain how these psychiatrists invented the explanation of my distress about all this harassment, which I've explained is torture and is a deliberate strategy that was used by the Stasi in East Germany to neutralise political dissenters, and this is the exact same strategy of psychological harassment and physical harassment that's been used against me for nearly a decade now. So I'm not upset about all of that. I'm upset because I want to be a nun. Well, why didn't they say she's upset because she wants to be an astronaut, or she's upset because she's a lesbian, or she's upset because she wants to have a baby? Why did they particularly select this thing, she wants to be a nun? It's because they wanted to perceive me and present me as a religious fanatic with religious delusions. This was the reason they selected this explanation. So one of the things that it said in the slides I've shown, the reason that some people survived this psychological harassment by the East German state was because they had a strong network of friends, supporters and safe houses and so on. Well, I haven't had that on this earth, but I do have a strong network of friends and supporters in the communion of saints who are alive in heaven, and they help me. And I've got a particular devotion to St. John of the Cross. And this is how these people came to invent the explanation that I was so distressed because I wanted to be a nun. Because I was going to stay quite often in a monastery that's associated with him in Spain. It's the place where he died, and some of his relics are kept there. And they've got something like a retreat house there, which is where a place where people who are not monks there can go and stay and have a spiritual retreat for a few days, maybe attend a conference if someone's giving a lecture on a saint or some other topic. So it's perfectly normal behaviour for Catholics and people from other Christian denominations who are not monks or nuns to go and stay in a monastery for a few days, to have a quiet time and spiritual retreat and maybe chat with the monk or a nun or whatever. So this is quite normal behaviour. It later emerged that these psychiatrists didn't know that was normal behaviour, and they thought just any random person could go and just stay in a monastery for some bizarre purpose. So they were convinced. First of all, I thought, when I realised what was going on and they'd invented this explanation that all this distress was because I really wanted to be a nun and I was in denial about it. I had poor insight, which is why I was complaining about harassment and not complaining that I wanted to be a nun. So they didn't know all of this. They just thought I was randomly turning up at a monastery where people didn't normally stay. And obviously, well, this is a men's community for a start. There's only men who live in this community. What makes this even more bizarre, I can travel to this monastery in Spain in one day, although I have to set off very early in the morning, and it takes a minimum of 13 hours direct travelling to get from my home to this monastery in Spain. What makes this even more bizarre that they were convinced I wanted to join this community, I'm also pretty sure that they thought I was convinced that I was actually a member of this community, despite the fact it's a men's community and I'm quite obviously not a man. And the reason they came up with this was because I wanted to do some knitting while I was staying at the monastery. So I emailed one of the friars, the one that looks after the guests who stay there, and I said, I'm having some knitting needles posted there so I can do some knitting when I come. So that's if a package turns up with my name on it, that's the reason why. And he said, okay, that's fine. But they, because I was having a package sent there, leapt to the conclusion that I thought I was going to be living there and joining this community, or that I was already a member of this community. But the reason I did this was because you can't take knitting needles in hand baggage on an aeroplane from Britain. So I only took hand baggage because you had to pay £10 to check a bag in and £10 on the way back. So it cost me less than £10 to have these knitting needles sent to the monastery by post, and it would have cost me £20 on each occasion if I'd taken my own knitting needles and brought them back again. And since I used them there at least 3 times, I spent about £8 sending them there, and it would have cost me £60 if I'd taken them my own there and brought them back each time. So that's why I did that. But they're not interested in normal explanations for anything. So they told the friars there that I wanted to join their community, or that I already thought I was a member there, or something like that. I'm not entirely sure. Well, what makes this even more bizarre is that there's a women's community of the very same order only half an hour from where I'm living. So why wouldn't I just have gone there and tried to join that one? And also, if I particularly wanted to join a women's community of this order in Spain, well, there's one in the very same town where this men's community is, but they don't have guests staying there, and that's not so associated with the saint, St. John of the Cross, because he was living in this monastery, obviously, because it's a men's community. So they invented this explanation that I was so distressed because I wanted to be a nun, because they wanted to explain away my devotion to this saint and spiritual experiences that I've had. They wanted to pathologize them to be in line with their own secularist, atheistic worldview, which they consider to be objectivity and neutrality, even though they have absolutely not a shred of evidence that anybody's religious belief is false. They don't have any shred of evidence that anybody's religious belief or experiences, supernatural experiences, are false. This is a belief of theirs, it's a religion. But on the basis of that, they could go around telling people that I was mentally ill and invent this reason why I went to this monastery, just so they could dismiss the real reason why I go there, which I'll just summarise as saying I feel very close to the saint there and he helps me. And I don't feel that close to the saint in any other place. He helps me when I go there, and that's why I go to this particular monastery, which takes me at least 13 hours to get there. And if I wanted to become a nun, I'd go and stay with the women's community and try and join that. I mean, these people, they're I don't even know what to say about it. It's just so ludicrous. And it is true that I did consider joining a community in the past, but it didn't work out at the time. It may have worked out later on, but in the intervening period between that, I became a Catholic, and I decided I didn't want to join any community that wasn't a Catholic community. And now, after going through all of this, I really don't want to be living with other people. So I wouldn't consider becoming a nun, because that would involve living in a community with other sisters, and I don't want to live with other people. I've had enough of other people. So it's completely out of the question now, even though I may have considered it in the past. So this is why they invented this explanation, just to validate their own worldview, even though they haven't got a shred of evidence that the way I'm presenting and understanding things is false. They've got no evidence whatsoever, but they've got the power. They've got more power, they've got more status, so basically they can do whatever they want. So that's how that situation came about. So Anyway, I've been talking for quite a long time now. I don't want to say any more, but this campaign of psychological harassment that's been perpetrated against me, that people are convinced is helping me, and have been so convinced of that to the great detriment of my psychological state, have caused me such enormous distress, which I've mentioned on previous videos, and the reason I'm so distressed is because it's a very distressing experience. It's intended to be distressing, and in fact, as I've demonstrated, it was a strategy of psychological harassment developed in the Soviet bloc in East Germany to neutralise political dissenters. Anyway, I shall leave it there now for this evening, because obviously I want to be assembling my video on YouTube and then dreaming about my beloved all night long, because he's so wonderful and we're made for each other. But don't forget to be alert, because I will be turning up to arrest you for harassment. Hasta la próxima.
The footman memorized the number, but the prince still holds both the slippers. A new dream of Paris for a bed sit and Canterbury tales. Canterbury tales.
Don't try to change me, you're wasting your time. Now I got something much better in mind. Robert De Niro's waiting, talking Italian. You bring me alive. He's a bad, bad boy. I'm a bad, bad girl. And we're getting back.
It's why Catholics have the best sex.
Adelante.
Oh, what care I for my house and my land? What care I for my money? Oh, I'd rather have a kiss from the wild gypsy's lips. I'm away with the Raggle, Taggle, Gypsy.
with the Raggle, Taggle, Gypsy.
I'm away with the Raggle, Taggle, Gypsy.